Joining us to talk more about it is Senator Pat Toomey. He's a Republican from Pennsylvania. He's also the ranking member of the Senate Banking Committee. And let's talk this through, Senator. Your argument is that this is a distorted job market right now. Lay that out.
Sure. Well, Becky, you know, if you can receive unemployment benefits indefinitely that pay more than it pays you to go to work, well, a certain number of people are not going to go to work. I think that's just common sense. But, you know, I think the big picture here that we shouldn't lose sight of is our economy is not in a recovery mode anymore. We're in a full-blown expansion. We were in recovery in the third quarter of last year when we grew by 30%. Now we've got a really robust expansion. As you know, the Fed is projecting 7% real GDP growth this year, unemployment getting down to 4.5%. And with prices rising all around us, it's 2023 before there's a median agreement that we get off zero, and we're still buying bonds at $120 billion a month. The thing that I can't understand is when you have really robust growth, tremendous improvement in the employment market, and right now we've got about as many job openings as there are people looking for jobs, and prices are right. It's not like the inflation picture is benign, and they are still in such an accommodative mode. This, I think, is dangerous.
Senator, is your beef with the Fed, or is it with your own House and Senate?
It's both.
I mean, you guys are the ones who gave these extended benefits.
Well, not the most recent round, right? The March bill passed exclusively with Democrat votes, right? That was a huge blowout spending bill that had really almost nothing to do with COVID. The economy didn't need it. It was counterproductive. I opposed it, as did every Republican in Congress. Prior to that, last year, we were in a very different place. Look, in March, when we first passed these extraordinary bills, you remember what things were like a year ago, March. I still didn't think it was a good idea to systematically pay people more not to work than they make working, but it was a price the Democrats insisted on to do the overall rescue package. So that's how it got started. Going on indefinitely is just a terrible idea, but that's only part of the problem. I really do think that what the Fed is doing, this unbelievably extreme accommodative policy, when you have a really robust recovery or expansion underway, I can't reconcile those two.
Isn't this a problem that to some extent is starting to solve itself? I mean, I think you have 23 states now that have said that they are not going to pay those extended benefits anymore. And by the way, they run out in a couple of months anyway. I feel like a couple of months from now, we're going to see a much more realistic picture.
I think the picture gets better in the fall, and yes, you're absolutely right. There are a lot of states, they're not the most populous states, but there are a lot of states that are refusing to participate in this. But I'm concerned about what kind of damage we'll be doing on the inflation side by then. And I'm concerned also that the Fed has backed itself into a dangerous paradigm, which is to say, when you establish that the target isn't to keep inflation below 2%, it's to average 2% over some indeterminate period of time. And now we're above 2%, but don't worry, it's all transitory. That kind of forces the Fed to sit back and wait. And we know that monetary policy affects the economy with long and variable lags. So how long are they going to wait, and how much are they going to have to do then to catch up?
So what would you like to have seen the Fed do yesterday?
Well, look, I think tapering should have started a long time ago, frankly. So I would like to see a more definitive movement. I mean, it's nice that we can now talk about tapering and it's not squared. You know, you don't have to talk about talking about it. But look, we need to get on with this, in my view. I would have hoped that the median projection for moving off zero on Fed funds wouldn't have been 2023, but would be next year. I just think we need to move towards normalizing as soon as we can.
What do you think the fallout from that will be when we do? I mean, right now, I think the basic expectation, at least in the markets, is that you will hear more plans about this maybe in August. From Jackson Hole, you'll hear more plans about when they plan to start selling down some of the bonds or stop buying, at least. And that could come a little later this year. If they ease into it like that, it's probably something that the market would take well, but you worry that it'll be too late in the real economy at that point?
Well, I mean, better than never, but yeah, it's kind of late. And yes, I think that is what the market expects. And so a departure from that would be somewhat of a surprise, but I would rather do that. You know, think about the housing sector, right? Is it possible to have a housing sector that's more robust? Is that even possible, right? Prices are going up so rapidly in so many places that people are just priced out of homes. I mean, I'm not projecting some kind of calamity there, but prices are going up too fast to be healthy, and there's a scarcity. And yet, the Fed's buying $40 billion of mortgage-backed securities every month to depress further mortgage rates. Why is that necessary at this point?
If the Fed stopped doing that and then raised rates, it would also make housing prices more expensive as mortgage rates went up. It's kind of the paradox that you're stuck in at this point.
No, I think actually the interest rates tend to get capitalized in prices, right? So if interest rates went up a little bit, at least you'd put a serious damper on the escalation of prices, and that would be a return to something like approaching normal. So I think that would be a lot healthier. So yeah, I'm sure eventually we will get there, and yeah, I get the expectations that we'll learn more in Jackson Hole, and we'll probably start getting specifics, and maybe things start to change next year. But I'm really concerned. You know, we've also got it's not since World War II that we've had an expansion of the money supply that we've witnessed in the last 18 months. So it's not as though everything's completely normal, but there's a supply bottleneck, and so that explains a price spike somewhere.
Sure.
No, we've got unbelievably accommodative policy that's got to be driving this.
Senator, let me switch gears a little bit and ask you about this infrastructure bill. It sounds like there are now 21 of your colleagues who are prepared to sign on to the bipartisan deal that really limits the scope of things and looks very much at just traditional infrastructure, bridges, roads, tunnels. You're not one of the senators that's signed off on that just yet. Would you consider that?
I'll consider it. It looks like it's close to some of the principles that I've been talking about from the beginning of this, which is, number one, an infrastructure bill should actually be about infrastructure, and I think they're keeping it to the scope of actual infrastructure. Number two, we shouldn't undo the 2017 tax reform, and my understanding is that this framework does not include raising taxes. What I think the main way we pay for this ought to be is to repurpose money from previously passed bills, money that hasn't been spent yet, and that never had anything to do with COVID anyway. We've got many hundreds of billions, probably over $1 trillion in that category. That's the best thing, the best way to pay for this, rather than just more deficit spending and creating more debt that the Fed's probably going to buy. I'm looking at it closely. I'm open to it. I will say, you know, getting 10 or 11 Republicans looks like it probably wouldn't be enough, because we have some Democrats who are refusing to go along with a package that doesn't include the expansion of the welfare state. So it's going to be tricky, but I'm open to looking at the specifics in this proposal.
Well, that's why I ask. I mean, they need probably at least 15 senators to sign on to that, maybe closer to 20, depending on how many Democrats balk.
Could be.
But it does sound like what you've laid out before. Why are you kind of holding back at this point? What's the hang up?
No, because, well, there's a lot of details have not been worked out. How is it actually going to get paid for? There's some kind of plug things in there that are not very specific, and we don't know how they would work. For instance, there's this notion that there's going to be private financing. Okay, well, what does that look like? Is the government going to set up an infrastructure bank and capitalize it, and then there's going to be private lending? And what's the source of repaying those private loans? How does that work? We've got no details whatsoever. So it's an interesting idea. I'm not ruling it out, but the details matter.
Senator Toomey, thanks for your time today.
All right, thank you.